again, I wanted to say thank you very much for having us representing the Scarborough Fire Department. My name's Nicholas Reichard, and I'm here with my chief, Car 1, Rich Kinlan. And so I'll be talking over the next, hopefully, like 40 minutes. I have 60 slides. They're very visual and just a lot of little stories. So I just, again, I want to introduce myself. History means a lot to me, and what I've learned that within the fire service, there's a lot of pride that comes to each fire department. I've been in constant awe of all of the people that I work with, and I feel very fortunate to stand before you today to present this, and I'm lucky and proud to be a part of the Scarborough Fire Department. This project has been really fun and has made me only want to dive deeper into this. I have, personally, I have a very diverse background, and I've been wanting to tell stories visually since I was a little kid. I went to art school, and I spent most of my 20s exploring the world, prolonging the fact that I needed to become an adult one day, and learning pretty much every way not to use a credit card. But in my 20s, I traveled the world from the Himalayas to the deep streets of Tokyo. I've been lucky enough to publish a few books of my own, and it's definitely what brought me here today. So in November of 2022, I got hired full-time as a firefighter here, and I switched careers during the pandemic. Figured just having my art would be more fun and do something that I've really never thought I could do. But one of the very first things our instructor taught us in the fire academy was, he said, well, welcome to the family. And so I quickly learned how important history and traditions were a part of the fire service, so this is very important to me. And it didn't take long before I started realizing the significant amount of history that this department has. Our new public safety building right now may not have a lot of pictures on the wall like a lot of our outlining stations at Pleasant Hill or Pine Point, but collectively there's an unbelievable amount of history that still is yet to be told. So hopefully I can share with you a story that maybe you haven't heard yet. So when I first got hired again, I just started looking through like drawers and things, and I found some old photographs, started asking questions, started scanning things, and it just brought me deeper and deeper. And then someone showed me these amazing old photo albums that were put together. This one in particular, which is on the back table, was put together by Doc Higas. There's a series of these, pretty much one per decade, and they're really special. These books pretty much laid the foundation of my research, and it was really, really interesting to kind of pull things together. One thing I'll talk about in a little bit is how we weren't always just one department. There were 6 or 7 fire departments within this one town. So I'll go to, when I was collecting all of this for research and figuring out the scope of this project, which is obviously never ending, where do we start? And so as we were sourcing all of the old documents and photographs and everything we could find from each station to bring it to one central place, that was really one of the first goals, a part of this project. So we had established an empty bedroom as the temporary place of the historical project for the Scarborough Fire Department. So right now, this is where all of the binders and the posters and the photographs live. And then once everything was in, it was kind of like, all right, let's slow down and start figuring out what we have. So some of this presentation kind of touches on some of the fun little documents that I found by random just by looking through things. So I know there's so much yet to be uncovered, but I'm excited again. So this is my second version of this presentation. The first presentation that I ever gave was last year, where we had a part of our history was the very first, we call it the rookie school. That's a probationary firefighter. So in your first year of getting hired full-time, you spend an entire year on probation. And just last year, we had a 3-week academy. And on day 1 of the academy, I was fortunate enough to give the historical presentation to the probational firefighters. So the presentation you're getting today is very different. One thing that I had learned when I first got hired here was really wanting to understand the patch that I don on my sleeve. And being from Ohio, seeing 1658 like blew my mind because nothing's that old in the Midwest. So I wanted to understand, well, what is this, and what could I do, what could I say that would help install this sense of pride with the town that we live in and we serve in. And so that was my first mission. And so while the probationary firefighter presentation I gave is very heavy with the town, with sprinkles of the fire department, it was kind of where things got kicked off. So now we can cut right to the chase. We know, hopefully, most about the town here in Scarborough. So it made me think, where do I begin? So a few months ago, when I was really starting to prepare for this presentation, I thought back when the Scarborough Fire Department was founded, which was around 1914, 1915, when things really started progressing pretty quickly, fire companies getting established. But I was really curious after listening to a podcast about the Great Portland Fire of 1866, what kind of an impact did that have in the surrounding communities? Because clearly it missed Scarborough. 1915 versus 1866, what was the disconnect? There were a lot of surrounding fire departments that were established shortly after the Great Portland Fire. So we know for a fact that that fire had an impact in towns. Why didn't it have an impact in Scarborough? That was a question that I wanted to learn. So then I started thinking back to the geography of the town. Well, we've never had the central downtown like Saco or Biddeford, South Portland, even Westbrook. And there was a couple of things that just made sense to say, okay, well, we had a lot of small communities, and it would probably have been a lot harder to get things together. So what that made sense to me. And the other thing that I kind of had guessed and assumed was in the early 1900s, Scarborough was the hub, obviously, for transportation and tourism, and there was just buzzing all around. Everyone was probably trying to make a lot of money in the summer, survive the winters. So who had time to really start that fire department? And so that was kind of my theory. The formation of our fire department started around these hotels. And then specifically on July 27th, 1909, the dramatic fire that consumed the Jocelyn Hotel, as Rodney wrote in his book. And they said that fire started in adjacent property and because it lacked an organized fire department, residents could only stand by and watch these fires as they ravaged the hotel. But in there was another story, and he added that the fire, there was concern that the fire was going to reach the Newcomb farm, and so Fred Newcomb sent his son Skip to retrieve the vital records from the store, which was located not far from the burning buildings. And it was said in this book that the young boy rode his bicycle so hard and fast to Proud's Neck that when he got there, he had lost the strength in his legs. So he was so wobbly that he could barely get from his bicycle into the building. So his father, a successful businessman, was really concerned that this fire was going to burn his business down. He sent his son to go get his records from the store, and the building ended up being okay, which is great because this building has quite the significance with the fire department, as we're going to talk about here and now a little bit later. So pictured here is Fred's store, and it did not burn down, which is great because this soon became the grounds for the first meeting in the formation of the Black Point Hose Company, which was made at the request of Fred Newcomb. So when I talked about looking through random little documents in the historical office, this was one of them that I found. It was written from 1923, no real significance, but at the same time, it does show that it was sold to the Black Point Hose Company, which I just thought was really cool. Wanted to throw that in there. So along there, I had found another document, which so far this is the earliest known record that I've seen written at the request talking about the formation of the department this year from December 29th, 1915. And it says, as they were requesting funding to get things going, there was quite a bit of these types of letters sent to different businesses and whatnot, trying to get some money, all of them denying that request, because I'm sure everyone was at the time. But they were acknowledging these individuals trying to do something. And so a lot happens in the next few years. We'll talk about a little bit specific each individual one, but here are the dates that we have for each fire company that was started. And it was kind of a daisy chain effect. So you have them forming one after another. I added this photo because I really felt like this might have been one of the earliest known photographs we have of the fire department. You have this hose cart, you've got horses. I have not seen another one from Scarborough. It does show Pleasant Hill, Scarborough Fire Department on it, which if Pleasant Hill hadn't formed until 1927, it's possible that was soon thereafter. Maybe this was a training, or it could have been an inaugural event, but that's just what I have. So I'm going to go back a second. So as you're going to notice, our Oak Hill station is our central station, the station that we have PD, we've got our communications, dispatch, we have fire. However, it's the one station that does not have a specific date or year. So I'd always wondered why. Why is it this one station that for so long has been the most pivotal location for our fire department, our public safety, but yet in the beginning we have the least amount of information, the least amount of history collected on it, until I did find this document from the Portland Rubber Company, and there was a very interesting sentence. This was written in 1915, and it shows that it potentially that the Oak Hill Fire Company had started potentially around the same time as the Dunstan Fire Company, as they were requesting to furnish the same hose, the same outfit as West Scarborough and Oak Hill. We have seen some documents which show that there are ups and downs between periods where there was an active phase in a fire company, and then maybe a few years where there was a lot of inactive members. So it's very possible that they started in 1915, but didn't really get things going until the 1920s. But this was my first document that really made me raise the question, when did Oak Hill really form it and get going? So again, around this time, all of these different fire companies what did they need? They were trying to get something that could be resemblance of this. They would put a hose cart with some pumps and some hoses and some tools on it. They had, there were some documents and some written records that there were a lot of unsuccessful attempts by pulling it by automobile, that they could only make it, just right down the road before the vehicle would break down. They pulled it by horses, but it was too slow. And so eventually, these were phased out. Some of the fire companies had used the carts for up to 15 to 20 years. But the first known fire truck and record that we had seen was in 1921. The Proutsneck Association had received the truck from the town. And so back to the very first established fire company, Pine Point, was in 1914. These photos here are from some years after, but just showing the original fire company. To this day, there's a significant amount of pride at all the fire companies, but Pine Point still has probably the largest call company out of all of the different companies. So there was another story that was interesting. In the mid-1920s, there was a committee appointed to see about buying an electric horn, and the horn was purchased, but then it was voted to send it right back. It's classic. That they were then, instead of having the electric horn, they wanted a bell, and they paid $23.90. And later that same year, the committee aimed to erect a tower for the bell, which would be attached to the school, and that cost $40. So it says years after, the bell disappeared, and the tower was taken down due to its condition. I know that there's some good stories about the bell and its whereabouts, or whether it was found, or who has it, but I've heard some rumblings. So my absolute favorite story that I've heard so far in the history has to do with the Dunstan Fire Company. And there was actually a really great newspaper, which you can see here pictured on the left. And this is attached to the same article. I just broke it up to make it visually look better. But when the Dunstan Fire Company first started, they ran their outfit out of where the Historical Society is, or it was stored there at that time. And early in the years, I'm not sure if it was in the 20s or when it was, but apparently I read that there was a strike, a railroad strike. The rail company brought in a group of strike breakers and to be hosted in the car barn. And the way the legend was written was that some of these men were wandering around the streets, whether they were under the influence or not, and someone pushed the fire alarm button, which caused the chain reaction, and the church bell rang, and the Dunstan Fire Company showed up, and there was a big fight. And apparently, the entire Dunstan Fire Company was arrested for insinuating a riot, but later was let go, and the police had sided with the firefighters. But I still, just the idea of that time period, and you have strike breakers and a bunch of firefighters, and that just, it was a good story. So moving right along, just a collection of all of the fire trucks from the town. I believe this was some type of postcard. But the first known record that we had of a fire drill was from Black Point, April of 1916. It said the alarm came from the church. They had water on a house in 8 minutes, which was a really excellent test for the hose company that day. But the first record for a fire was a year later, and it was around 239 Black Point Road. And there's a note that says that the record of this fire read, there was a lack of ladders, rubber boots, helmets, and a hydrant wrench, which was very evident. So clearly lots of progress still needed to be made. So we had a lot of fire companies being founded in the mid 1915, 16 in that area. Pleasant Hill wasn't until 1927, which was really short after a massive fire that broke out and burned a lot of land. Basically, I heard it was from Spurwink to Fog Road. It required, it said almost 300 people, and they had laid a single hose line from Higgins Beach to the Fred Libby residence, which was being treated by the flames. So at that point, I think it really inspired the fine folks at Pleasant Hill to band together and to create a fire company, and that's exactly what they did in March of 1927. And then it shows, I have records here that say in 1931, they purchased 4 5-gallon water tanks, and then later they bought a chemical tank and a bell. And there is a bell that stands in front of the station today, and that is I believe that's the original bell. So after all of the fire companies were getting off the ground and getting established, all except North Scarborough, in the meantime, the Scarborough Firemen's Association was formed. It was essentially just a bunch of really inspired men and who wanted to figure a way for funds to be distributed equally through each fire company. And so while this picture hangs up in Pine Point, at the Pine Point Fire Station, relatively around the same time as the Firemen's Association was established, it said that, and this is where I had read in the records specifically, that they wanted to really help avoid the smaller departments forming and try to, again, distribute that wealth and purchase of fire trucks and the right equipment. Which they were very successful, because within just a few years, which this is actually less than a year later, they had already started sending inquiries to the insurance companies, asking, what should we do? What can we do to help our insurance rates? And we found this document in one of the stations that was just in a box on the ground. And so, and it wasn't that it was being mishandled or whatnot, but it just shows how much work, I think, yet to be done, but how amazing it is that we're still uncovering these really amazing and important documents. So this document in itself really reads and says, we recommend you work together, basically. And within a few years, we can confirm that letter from the insurance company had an effect, because here we go, the newspaper is acknowledging that Scarborough is enjoying its Class D insurance rating, one of the few towns its size rated that way. So it's really cool to see the progression that the town has been making from the mid-1930s to 1940. By this point, they are now working under one unified logo. So after that, in 1936, North Scarborough has officially been founded. I have written here some notes. It said, in March 12th, 1936, a meeting was held at the home of Mattie Brown. The founding members were very active and farmers and business owners. North Scarborough was the first company to have a woman firefighter, Miss Charles Parker, from 1941 to 1947. And as of 1984, it said North Scarborough still had the only woman firefighter, Miss Marilyn Nelson, who carried a long-standing tradition of being associated with the North Scarborough Company. So this picture here is Engine 5 from 1936. So North Scarborough added another completely different dynamic because they were doing something a little bit different. There was a lot more farm firefighting. And I had the opportunity to sit down with Clayton Skillings, who I believe 60 years, was he 60? Something. Yeah. Over 60 years of his service. So I sat down with him last summer, and he was telling me how, it wasn't uncommon that, on these farm fires, we had to pull 3 or 4 hose beds of lengths in the middle of February. So there's thousands of feet of, just hoses everywhere. It's probably 10 degrees and snowing, and they're just outside all day fighting these fires. And I think for me, it really is motivating to hear those kind of stories and to show like the people that came before you. But it's pretty impressive to think of fighting a fire back in that time. And so the next character, the next person I'd like to introduce here is, by sheer luck, Scarborough had a new resident, and his name was Phil Higas. He quickly became known to everyone by town. He moved here from it says Foxborough, Mass. In the late 40s to set up his practice as a doctor and raise his family. Again, it wasn't long before everyone called him Doc. Had a significant impact in this town. It was later read in his obituary. Dr. Higas was the only physician in town. His office for many years was on Route 1 and Scotto Hill Road. His fees were $3 for an office visit and $5 for a house call. And they said he had a heart as big as a shoe. And one of his fellow physician friends said that he'd go anywhere or do anything for anybody, whether they could pay or not. So this is a picture of him in 1957. I really like that this picture here. But again, the impact that he had in Scarborough, and not just Scarborough, but the state of Maine and possibly the entire United States, and what he contributed to EMS is very special. What I was kind of saying in my presentation to the probational firefighters was the significance that this town has in its transportation, from trolley cars to the airports, to the railroad, to the highways, Route 1. It really clicked in my brain why someone like Doc Higas would see such a need for EMS service in the state, and he was the guy to get it done. At that time, if there was a car accident on Route 1, they would have to have the hospital bring a vehicle out from Portland, and he quickly knew that this was not an efficient system, and he could save lives a lot faster if we had an ambulance here that could transport them straight. So he immediately went to the Lions Club, proposed his idea of getting a rescue, and outfitted exactly like they would have outfitted an ambulance in World War II, which is exactly what they did. The Lions Club loved it. They purchased this panel truck, and they turned it into an ambulance, which was, I believe, built and constructed with Vern Paulson, who had done multiple of our ambulances and been a significant member of the rescue for a long time. But this first Rescue 1 had 4 stretchers in it, and again, it was stationed at Oak Hill, where it still is at today. Not this particular unit, but the new ones. So the first year, the squad handled 12 calls. Its efforts were quickly getting noticed as EMS service was saving lives. Shortly after, Doc became a member of the Maine State Rescue and First Aid Association, where he propelled to the status of state director. It almost gave me goosebumps to kind of see that, we're very proud of the EMS work we do in this town, and to see that the founding father of the rescue had such an impact that, he would travel around and have seminars of over 100 people. They would attend and really look at this person to teach them so they could go back to their towns, so much to a point that I had seen in a lot of newspaper records, the Standish and all of the surrounding towns would come, and basically they mirrored and adapt the exact same program that we had developed here in Scarborough. Scarborough is known as the very first volunteer ambulance service in the entire state of Maine, which is something we're definitely very proud of. But not only did Doc help start the rescue, but he also helped raise the necessary funds for the canteen, which became much more than just serving beverages at the fires. Obviously, again, some of these fires and the conditions in that time were very extreme. There was, they would be outside potentially all day. So having those beverages would probably mean quite a bit than us being able to just go to a gas station, get some Gatorade or whatnot. But they would do a lot. The canteen and everyone a part of the canteen would do things for the entire town. They would constantly be going around and hosting events and very active. So again, it was much more than just firefighters, and it was this whole community coming together. It was just another sign of that. So around that time, that was in 1957. From the 50s to the 60s and 70s, things get really busy in Scarborough. The fire department has always been keeping up with the busyness and everything going on. In this photograph, this is from the fire from the Danish village. This is Chief Henry Gold, and they're just looking at the aftermath of the burn. And we definitely see a massive development. And as I mentioned earlier, that when Chief Carson first joined the company when he was really young, he had said that there were over 300 members of the call company. And so it's pretty special when you think of the amount of people that would come together to help fight some of these fires. One of the newspapers that I had read, Gold recalls, he said one of the worst fires that he remembers was in 1966, and it was a general alarm in the Dunstan area. And so I actually found one of the photos from that fire, which I loved. I'd love to get a better scan of it, but it was really cool. It's been one of the challenging things to start finding some clips and matching them with some of the photographs that aren't just from the newsprint. So one of the challenges and one of the things that I'm excited to be doing over the next few years. But he did describe this particular fire as one of the most tragic the town has ever suffered, which I would imagine for as long as he was a part of the fire department was a pretty significant fire. Along with, I had mentioned the Danish village burning down, another significant historical monument had multiple fires from what I've read, some arson or whatnot. And so there were different photographs from different eras, different fires, all at the Downs. So maybe it was destined that the Downs doesn't operate anymore, but that's just my thought. But that was a pretty significant. There's a lot of significant history with the Downs fires, and so with that, this is about the time where things getting very busy and changing. And as I mentioned, the very first the full-time employees with the fire department was one of the chiefs. I know when Robert Carson was full-time, and from there on, things really started progressing. Just a few photos that I've pulled, but it is pretty amazing to me that this department's been around since 1915, and if you think about this list being very short, shows that the amount of impact and how long some of our chiefs have been, maybe not necessarily just a chief, but have been a part of the department in one way or another. So we're getting to the late 70s, and it was voted, this is engine 6 was actually the very first white engine in Scarborough, and I thought it was interesting because we've inherently in-house talked about why did they go to red, why did they go to white, and what was the story. I did hear a story from around 1978. Chief Anton was debating whether or not we should paint all of the fire trucks lime green. At that time, that was a color. Like Biddeford had lime green fire trucks, and I think that there was a vote, and apparently a lot of people showed up to vote to make them red and not lime green. So we have red fire trucks now. But also in this picture, rescue. This is Rescue 1, but Rescue 2 is pretty much identical. After the original Rescue 1, which was seen in the photographs earlier, was replaced, the Lions Club had this model, and it was involved in a motor vehicle accident after 1 week in service. But it was quickly replaced, identical to what they had. And then in 1986, the second rescue was moved permanently down to Dunstan. So this here, the engine pictured here is the 1957 Maximum, and it was a 500-gallon tank. So as things are getting busy, more staff, more things are going on. Again, the rescue really had its work cut out for them. But it wasn't just the town that they were dealing with, but it was laws and changes with licenses. I had read that and this was around when they call it the White Pages, which was one of the very first researches that realized pre-hospital care was working, and they had developed a nationwide program for people to get their EMT license. And this license actually was not easy for everyone to get, because here in Scarborough, everyone was a volunteer. Everyone had jobs. Now they have to go take a class, which was over 80 hours of their time. And thankfully, from what I had read, that most of the folks that were involved in the rescue went and passed the test and did it so they could continue working. But there were constant hurdles, and one of the themes that we've seen is that staffing and just like different challenges of things changing. So I also have written down here that the first female member of the Scarborough Rescue was Beverly Farquhar. Yep. And she was also an ER nurse from Maine Med. So that just some interesting stories that I've read. And here's a picture of the accident. But again, it was quickly replaced, and no one was seriously injured. So it's the most important thing. So again, as I've mentioned a few times, Scarborough is getting busier and busier. We're moving on in time. There's a lot of active members. I read that I've asked questions that at one point, it was so competitive to be on the call company that the only way to get on was if someone moved or passed away. And they had a structure known as like 20-10-10. So it was like 20 full-time members, 10 probational, and 10 reserve firefighters. And that was at each firehouse. I had heard some stories that when there was an opening, you would go into the office, and if you were one of the younger ones, which most of them started off pretty young, you were told, well, you can go wait outside. And they'd have to stand out in the rain maybe for a little bit. But once they were in, they were treated like family, and apparently there was no hazing involved in any of it. Everyone was willing to teach and to learn. There was a copious amount of training weekly. There was a lot of pride going on, and it was very special. So we've talked about the fire department and the rescue, but all this is going on at the same time as the significance with our communications department. And the history of the department could not be without the mention of these two operators, which is a mother and daughter. It's Miss Elizabeth Lisby and her daughter Shirley. So they provided 24-hour coverage on their phones and alarm system from their home on Black Point Road, which happened to be the Newcomb store. They lived on the second floor of that same building, which the Black Point Hose Company had originally met to form. So I think that's a significant building and significant importance to this fire department. I had read that At one point, they had not taken a single day off in over a decade. And when they did take a break, Chief Carson was the one that would go and answer the phone for the calls when they were out of town. So around this time, things started changing. One of the questions that's been asked to me quite a bit was, well, if Pine Point was the very first station, why are they engine 4? And if North Scarborough was the last, why are they engine 5? And so my first thought was it had to have been around the same time as our communications was getting established, which was 1947 when they started answering phones from their home, which clearly shows right here the list of everything. And that box 8, which is the rescue. So this is something we're still kind of investigating, but I have looked at some photos of the original fire trucks to see when did they start painting the numbers on the side to see if we can narrow it down to a specific decade. But it's definitely one of the things that I find really interesting. In this time also, you'll see that each town was designated a specific number. So if you go into Portland right now, or South Portland, or Biddeford, or Saco, and I radio to their communications department, the first thing I say is, Scarborough Ambulance 2 to fire alarm. That acknowledges who we're trying to talk to. Here in Scarborough, we still say 4-0. 4-0 was Scarborough's insignia as their designated number. When it was one radio system, all of these towns would be calling in. They needed to know who are they trying to ask for. 4-0 would instantly say they're trying to talk to Scarborough. We're one of the few or only towns that I know of that still uses that communication that way, which I think a lot of us find pretty special. So taking a step back, before the radio communication service, back to that bell. This is the bell that's in front of Pleasant Hill. In the very early days, what would happen is there was they would ring this bell. You can see the sledgehammer right on the side there. But what they would do is they would use the sledgehammer to sound the alarm. And so what would happen is someone would then go to the church bell and ring, and it would be a set of rings would indicate where the fire was. What was written down was 1 bell 3 times was north of the church, 2 bells 3 times was south of the church, and 3 bells 3 times was on Prout's Neck. So they knew where should they go. There are a lot of records that show many people remember when sounds and the alarms were going off, so they knew which district things were going in. So there's a lot of rich history there. So I had mentioned a lot of the dedicated training that our firefighters were doing in the 80s and the 90s and way before too. But in 1984, it said the average age of the member was 32 years old, married with children, and worked out of town. The demand was still increasing on the services, and these people were providing a superior level of service at a minimum expense to the taxpayers. In 1984, the average member without rank would spend approximately 7 to 10 hours a week doing activities for the fire department. So that's a significant amount of time, and that shows again to the dedication. However, what it was showing was that as work was increasing and people were traveling further for work, it was becoming harder and harder to staff our apparatus when calls were coming in the middle of the day. This here's a picture of Chief Carson. And again, this article just really talks about the difficulty of trying to adapt to these towns that are progressing way faster than we can keep up with. But sure enough, the Scarborough Fire Department's been able to do just that. One last trick that Doc Higas had up his sleeve was proposing the idea to fix staffing by developing a student rescue program, which may sound kind of crazy, but back in that time, what they wanted was to say, we can have some students who want to learn EMS, can contribute and help. And this program had a great success. It was from, I believe, 1968 to 2006. There was a little bit of a gap early in the program history, but it was noted that a lot of the individuals who were a part of the student rescue program have gone on to become doctors, nurses, and firefighters. which I thought was a really special thing. So again, at this point, this is a clear indication to me that they are doing anything to figure out what could be a solution to staffing with the increasing need to meet the demand of the calls. So now we're moving on to our full-time staff. It started off needing to fill the gap for the rescue, and that was in 1982, John Skillings was hired. His role was to work a 40-hour work week covering the weekdays, guaranteeing paramedic coverage when most people were probably out at work. In 1987, 2 more paramedics were hired. It was Priscilla Locke and Betsy Carolyn, who just recently retired, and I was fortunate enough to get to work with her before she had retired. 2 years later, the town hired 2 more paramedics to complete the full 24-hour paramedic service, and they were Deputy Chief Tony Atato and Lee Chick. So the rescue also had assigned drivers at that time because I believe sometimes they would go to the call by themselves, and then a volunteer would come and drive them. And when that was getting strained, they tried to assign call signs 892 and 893 to be the assigned driver to make sure that they had someone to help take them. Now, enter our first full-time firefighter here in Scarborough, which was, they called him Willie Myers. And he ended up becoming a massive help in many different ways. But in one of the big ways was to really assist on the rescue and to help. And he ended up being a captain when he retired. And this is when Engine 7 had been dedicated to him. So, as much as I would love to touch on every single member and so many people that have had an impact in this department, which is one of the next big projects I would love to do. Over the next decade, this trend is continuing. And again, as I mentioned earlier, and today for the first time, or recently for the first time, the full-time department has more members than the active call members. So there are significant changes happening. Many of the members who are still active in the call company have been active members for 20 or more years, and a lot more years too. So Scarborough, just like the rescue and the student program and all of the different things that they've done over the history, and not just the fire department history, but just always at the forefront of innovation, there was now something new happening. Every single accident up until 1994 was handled by the rescue or the ambulance. They had extrication tools, they call them the jaws of life. They would have splitters and cutters. That Clayton Skillings had told me that if a really bad car accident came right in front of North Scarborough Fire Station, that the fire truck wouldn't turn a wheel because it would be the rescue handling the whole accident by themselves unless they needed the additional support of the fire department. But in 1994, Scarborough started their extrication team. I did find this picture earlier today, actually. I threw it in last minute, but this is Doc Higas when he was later in his life, and I believe had nearly retired, showing him practicing and still training with some of the tools, which I thought was really special. And in this lower right-hand picture, the squad on the left is our current squad, the one we still use today, and the model that they'd had replaced. But there was a great sense of pride. There was a lot of training that went involved, and Scarborough's been a well-respected leader in the extrication area in the greater Portland area. So just a few short years later, the Scarborough had formed, the full-time members had formed a union, and that was in 1998. And again, it just continues to grow every year. I know, as myself, as a union member, very proud to work here, and I think that's just part of the entire tradition, but definitely one for the history. So on another note, just kind of stepping back a little bit in time, Scarborough did have a line of duty death, and it's something that's, when it happens, it's very important for, I believe, every firefighter and all the communities that are involved to remember that event, and if anything, it helps serve as something just to remember and to live on, to be safe, and to, but William Quinton had been it was a very brief stint as a call member. He was young. He was 24 years old at the time of the fire department. It was in 1978 when he first started. There were about 250 members at that time. He was married and lived on Blue Point Road. He was a member of the Engine 6 Ladder 1. And they were responding to a chimney fire that was on County Road at 1219. And it said, the article states that a family member a house nearby was soundly sleeping early Saturday morning when they were awoken by a noise. The lady's husband heard something that sounded like a roll of thunder. They had gotten up, looked out the window, and saw a fireman who had blood on his face, and he was requesting the rescue unit. What had happened was Engine 7 and Ladder 1 had collided at a stop sign, and Ladder 1 had rolled over. And so, unfortunately, the firefighter had not survived, and 8 other firemen were treated and released with minor injuries. So with that, his funeral was a significant event from what I've heard, and more than 400 people attended, and over half of them were firefighters. Every single year at the anniversary of William Quinton's line of duty death, a lot of the chiefs, and last year I was lucky enough to go with them, pay homage to his funeral site and lay flowers and clean off his site. And there's a placard out front of Dunstan with his name on it. I've had the opportunity last year to sit down with 4 or 5 of the members. I sat down with Chief Carson a few times, Bruce Bell, Clayton Skillings, and Billy Weeks. And just what I've done, one of the first things I wanted to do, because these documents aren't going anywhere, I'll be able to look at them whenever I want, but I really wanted to be able to sit down and hear the stories, whether or not they were going to be listed on our website or just something we talk around the fire station. I just put my phone down on the table and recorded an audio of it and just tried to ask as many questions as I could. This is something that I want to continue doing, and I know others have expressed interest in doing it too. But definitely trying to sit down with as many of the members of the fire department. So this is where I would say my email is always open, and would love to try to meet other members and hear these stories, because that's really how we're going to continue the traditions that we have built. And that pretty much brings us up to today. 2024 in itself, we think about history. We don't think about history right now or yesterday. But I can tell you, just in the last year, in the few years since I've been a part of this department, there's been a lot of change, a lot of positive things happening. And again, it's the same things we've been dealing with over the last 40 or 50 years, but some significant events. Just in the last week, we had our very first life flight patient. And this is the fire that was fought earlier in last year in Proudsneck, which I was off on that day. I was bowling, but I was was not there. But these are the stories that are going to live on and be remembered, and we're going to continue to build on the history that we have before us. So I just want to say thank you for listening. So before we do some questions, I know our chief is going to come up and talk about not just the history, but now moving forward and a few other things with the department, and then maybe we can do some more questions. So here's the chief.
I'll be brief. I know everybody's been here for a little bit. I'll be brief. I just wanted to, first of all, introduce myself. My name is Rich Kindlen. I'm the current fire chief here in the town of Scarborough. As a matter of fact, on Saturday, I'll celebrate my 3rd year as the fire chief here. I came in 2018, and I won't ever say I replaced, but I took over for Deputy Chief Tony Attardo. I have a strong background in emergency medical services. I've been a paramedic for almost 30 years with some of the other things. I'm a Air Force veteran, but one of the things that's unique for me in talking about history is I am, and I'm very well aware, I am the first fire chief in this town that came from outside. Both myself and the police chief, who I adore, we both have a great relationship similar to Chief Thurlow and Chief Moulton. We both came from outside. I can't tell you why at this point in time in the town of Scarborough that outside chiefs were chosen for that point. I certainly hope it was for my qualifications and for what I'm going to bring to this community. But I do know that that is something that is a very big piece of that history, that this town has always been lucky enough to have a fire chief from within in this community. I live in this community. I love this community. One of the things that I remember from my interview when I came here was I wanted to be in a department that allowed me to be part of the community. I didn't want to just go to fires and medical calls. I wanted to go to things like this. I wanted to be part of Summerfest. I wanted to be down in Prouts Neck every 4th of July. I'm in Prouts Neck. Even though I'm supposed to be off, or it's my day off, but I'm there because I just love the community connection. And I did want to add just real quick to mention the growth that we've seen here. I think he mentioned the first set of calls was 12 calls a year for the ambulance. We are on track, Julie hasn't gotten me all the numbers yet, but we will be over 4,000 medical calls in this community for the last calendar year. The year prior to that, for fire and emergency, was 6,000 calls total. So we split them up. We split between the ambulance and that's out of all 6 neighborhood fire stations that some of them are staffed, some of them are not. That's a change that I implemented. There are some fire stations in town. Does anybody know what the average number of people in a fire station in town is? Take Hope Gill out of it. You can't guess that one, but how many people you think are in a fire station anytime? 2? 1. That's the average on a daily basis. And the ones that aren't staffed on a regular basis. So like Pleasant Hill is one. They have live-in students there, but there's no full-time person there. Pine Point has a couple students that live down there, but there's nobody staffed down there. And the reason for that is they have one of the most robust call companies. They take care of their side of town. They show up on every call. North Scarborough is starting to struggle with getting call company members to come out. So we're dealing with, in this day and age, we're dealing with the same things that the chiefs, my predecessors, had to. We're still dealing with them at a different scope. We have over 40 full-time firefighter paramedics, or EMS providers in the town now, compared to when I started, that was even, I think that was almost 10 less than even since I've been here. I added 8 since I've been here. And the reason why I mention that is it is a transition that Nick mentioned from this being a fully functional call company department to folks who live here or moved here, don't have that capacity to give back to the community in the way of 7 hours a week, or it's just not possible. And I believe that the citizens of this community expect more than a 20-minute response time. That's why we've been adding more staffing all the time. We also have about 45 part-time or per diems. They're firefighters that work in other departments on their regular day, and then they sometimes come here on their day, and they're called per diems or day firefighters. So we have that as well. And then, unfortunately, from the 317 number, we are down to 36 active call company members that are on the department right now. And again, it's just it's an example of what the town has turned into. The bedroom community, the double working households, they don't have time to come out in the middle of the night to go on calls. So we really do rely on some of that consistent staffing that's here. All the neighborhood stations are still open. They still run the calls. The call companies run them, but not every single one has a person there 24 hours a day. And we are working on that. We don't know what the future looks like, but we are certainly going to keep on keeping up with the growth here in this town and responding to the calls. I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to take up much more of your time, but I do want to give Nick some time for some questions, or for me, I can stay up here as well. So thank you so much for having us today.
Okay. So prior to the formation of these stations and these departments, there was a fire? What happened?
Just like the Jocelyn Hotel fire, I mean, you imagine the resources and how beautiful the inside of those grand hotels were. If there was a fire, I mean, I guess you're just going to watch it go up in flames. So there was nothing they could do. And even in the early days of the fires, there was still a lot of buckets and a lot of people having buckets and just doing their best. I mean, so.
1917, the Merrick House burned down, and that's on top of Fieldways, where we live, actually, right next to where the fire was. And I understand from some of the writings I've got earlier on, which I hope to share and get into more detail with Nick on later on, there is talk of a fire bucket brigade. And really moving buckets and such.
I think that was more than just a technique, and it was an approach than just like an actual crew of specific people, you know. Like I imagine that if my house was burning down at that time, that they were going to join the bucket brigade very quickly and help with whatever they could. So I think that at that time was just a very common thing in practice, because clearly each household having their own buckets would be a clear example of that.
And at some point, the fire department became taxpayers supported, or
Yeah.
were they always public?
So I think the answer is yes. What happened was a lot of the early funding for the department, each department did fundraising to fund the equipment. The town had shown early records of them funding specific things, and by the formation of the Scarborough Firemen's Association, that's really when the taxpayer money started being distributed. But there was funds contributed from the town, as an example of like them purchasing the 1921 fire truck for the Proud Snacks Association. It had said the town had done that. But there was a lot of different events. There was a story that Dunstan had bought a 24-pack of beer, and they were trying to raise money when they first started, and they did like a raffle. So there was all sorts of creative things. And even until the 70s, the Lions Club was really private money to fund the ambulance. And at that time, one of the ambulances cost $18,000, where today I think an ambulance costs a lot more.
415,000, the last one we bought.
So just from the 80s until now, there was a time in the records that stated the Lions Club knew this was the last ambulance they could purchase. And so those private fundings just got harder and harder.
You touched on this, Nick, as to training, but I have a particular background for asking. My father was in the fire department for years and years, a long time ago. And even most of the people in the earlier pictures that you have would not have a clue of how to run all of the marvelous equipment and how to deal with things today. So I'm wondering what, for someone like yourself becoming a full-time member of the fire department, just what training is required?
I think one of the first things that you learn is situational awareness. And what I've heard firsthand back in the day when a young member became qualified to be on the call company, that they would learn as they go. So they would say, well, you're not going to learn that, but they would know who to follow, and they would have someone that would kind of mentor them on the call company, and people would take people under wings, and that kind of thing would happen. I know I learn each and every day from my superior officers and senior firefighters, and I think that's just something that's a part of the job.
Are you indicating, though, did you mention the community college, or is there a specific type
Yep.
of courses?
There was, and the very first paramedic program in the state, which was taught by one of the volunteer firefighters, I believe, here, was at, I believe, in the Portland area, and there's a lot of training that happened back and forth between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, how many people here do remember the horns going off at various times? I never knew what the numbers meant, but yeah, it was pretty impressive to hear them. And I don't know when it stopped. When did they stop doing the horns? Does anybody know?
Upgrades of radios, I think that when the radios started being a big thing.
Roughly what year?
Well, I know there was a big stink sometime in the 80s that people wanted them gone. Some people wanted them gone, 80, because they were.
If you lived right next to one, I guess it could be awful.
In the late 80s, there was a huge upgrade in the communication system and dispatch. I read so in the late 80s, there was a big movement with that. I would imagine around then.
So those ambulances were still going in 1988 because I have a video, and I was taking a video of a property, but in the background was box 8, and I got all 8 blows before I cut the video on.
Nice.
So that was 1988.
That's awesome.
That's a sign of a true historian. You gotta wait to hear all 8 pieces before you submit. What a great presentation on the fire. We got